Hello and welcome to China Global Television Network. This is The World Today. I'm Beatrice Marshall in Nairobi. Canada has announced retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods starting September the 8th. It comes as the two countries failed to reach a deal to avert the new 50% U.S. tariffs on a range of Canadian goods. Jagruti Dave reports from Washington.
Trade talks broke down at the last minute between the two sides, and so that means those 50% tariffs are now in effect on a number of Canadian products, from beef to dairy to hockey sticks and wine. This affects $20 billion worth of Canadian exports. Now, both sides are really blaming each other for this. The US Trade Representative Jameson Greer said Canada declined to finalize the trade deal, and this was despite the US offering to give Canada the best treatment of any major exporter to the US market. Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney blamed the US, saying it made last-minute changes which were unfair and that it would start dollar-for-dollar retaliation with tariffs starting on September the 8th. Now, at a press conference, Mark Carney said essentially this was further confirmation to him of a fundamental shift in the US trade relationship with Canada. Let's take a listen.
Early last year in this room, I observed that the decades-long process of steadily increasing integration between our economies was over. Our government understood before many that America would transform all of its commercial relationships, that it would put a series of tariffs on its closest allies and use economic integration as a weapon. We recognize that sometimes its signature was written in pencil.
Now, Mark Carney has indicated he's looking to diversify Canada's trade relationships, looking notably to Europe and Asia, although it is debatable as to whether Canada can or even fully wants to unwind decades of cultural and economic entanglement with the United States.
Iran's top security official has warned that any country participating in the U.S. economic war against Tehran will be considered an enemy. Mohsen Rizai says Iran will strike the interests of countries who join the U.S. siege on Iran. It comes as Iran's parliament speaker Mohammad Bakr Khalibaf says Tehran has received messages from neighboring countries about shaping new security arrangements and economic cooperation in the region. He also said Washington had jeopardized the security of its allies through bullying and disregard for the sake of Israel. He instead called for a homegrown independent regional order to deliver peace and security. Sepasaremi reports from Tehran.
We can look at this situation from two perspectives, militarily and also economically. Militarily, things have been quiet in the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz in the past couple of weeks. But economically, it's a disaster. Iran is facing an unprecedented economic crisis. That's why Araghchi, Iran's foreign minister, has said that the new sanctions are a declaration of war. Iran's foreign ministry has called the new round of sanctions that are supposed to be announced illegal measures and inhumane, because Iran is already facing unprecedented economic problems, inflation, declining purchasing power, and the rial has been tripled, almost tripled in the last 2 years. So the situation economically, I think, is very complicated for Iran. And also the government is facing problems in gasoline. That's why it's planning to take some measures to maybe raise the price of gasoline in coming weeks. That Iran hasn't had good experiences regarding this, because we saw that what happened a few years ago, that it provoked massive protests across the country. And also, amid all this crisis, something important happened. A Speaker of Parliament, Ghalibaf, and also top negotiator, traveled to Iraq and negotiated with Iraqis. And maybe that's the reason why in the Strait of Hormuz it was announced that some Iraqi vessels have passed through this very important waterway. So this trip of Ghalibaf and also him saying that we have to expand our economic ties with Iraq shows that Iran now is relying more on its neighbors like Iraq, Turkey, Pakistan, and Afghanistan, as these sanctions might come to effect on Monday. So we have to see how the government of Iran and also the political establishment will react to this new round of sanctions, which, according to U.S. officials, are very harsh.
Israel says it launched a drone attack on what it called a militant target in southern Syria, saying it posed an immediate threat to its soldiers. Syrian state TV reported that the attack struck a civilian car in the town of Beijing in southwestern Damascus. Syria's foreign ministry called the attack a blatant violation of the country's sovereignty and came amid repeated Israeli attacks on Syrian territory. The Britain-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights has documented 57 Israeli attacks on Syrian territory in 2026. Egyptian Foreign Minister Badr Abdelati and Palestinian Authority Prime Minister Mohammed Mustafa have spoken over the phone on peace and humanitarian efforts in Gaza and the West Bank. Abdelati condemned the expansion of Israeli settlements in the West Bank. Meanwhile, in Gaza, over 1 million displaced Palestinians are struggling to secure enough food and clean water. CGTN's Rami Al-Megari reports.
At the beginning of August, the UN warned that Gaza was nearing the highest level of food insecurity, with 67% of the population facing food insecurity. Mariam Al-Thurani lives with her family in a displacement camp in Gaza City, with charity kitchens scaling back meal distributions, providing food for her 3 children has become increasingly difficult.
My husband is injured and we have no source of income. I struggle in every possible way to provide food for my 3 children. Today, we received no meals from the charity kitchen, and I don't know how I will feed them.
Mahmoud Hellis is displaced from the Shuja'iyya neighborhood east of Gaza City. Accessing water is an exhausting daily task. Every day, he and his children struggle to find even a small amount.
Water is a right from God for everyone, but we cannot get enough. We wash our clothes only once every 2 weeks because of the shortage. We even ration drinking water. A person needs around 5 liters a day, but we drink only 1 glass so we can save the rest for cooking and cleaning. Water is our greatest hardship.
Gaza's municipalities recently warned of an imminent water system collapse due to fuel and oil shortages. They say only 40 of around 700 generators have received oil.
People struggle on a daily basis to access their essentials, reliable access to clean water, to sanitation, to healthcare, to affordable and nutritious food. And we urge sustained efforts to ensure the rapid and unimpeded flow of humanitarian assistance into the Gaza Strip.
The UN also warned that around 10% of Gaza's population was approaching famine conditions, highlighting the severity of the humanitarian crisis across the Gaza Strip.
For more than 1 million displaced Palestinians across Gaza, securing enough food and clean water has become a never-ending daily battle, as the peace plan has yet to be fully implemented on the ground. Rami Al-Megari, CGTN, Gaza City.
The 17th conference of the parties to the UN Convention to Combat Desertification is underway in Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia. Leaders and experts from around the globe have gathered to discuss ways to tackle land degradation and build sustainable futures. CMG's reporter Tang Xin has more.
Restoring land, restoring hope. Here in Ulaanbaatar, the capital of Mongolia, the 17th Conference of the Parties to the UN Convention to Combat Desertification is currently underway. Mongolia spans 1.56 million square kilometers, yet few realize that more than 76% of its land is facing severe degradation, putting the livelihoods of its people at risk. The crisis, however, extends far beyond Mongolia's borders. And that is precisely why leaders and experts from around the globe have gathered here today to find real, lasting solutions. The conference brings together representatives from 197 parties. They include heads of state, ministers, and delegates from international organizations, the scientific community, and the civil society. The purpose is to formulate solutions to desertification, land degradation, and drought. Over the 2-week summit, participants are engaging in high-level ministerial dialogues. There are also specialized forums focused on science policy integration, innovation, and sustainable finance to drive progress toward land degradation neutrality.
Well, one thing is to prevent the desertification, to use, manage, and steward the land in the appropriate way. Most of the problems of land degradation are caused by overuse, like over-plowing, over-grazing, over-pumping. And so knowing how close we are to the threshold is important. So maybe the technology can help identify when we are close to the threshold.
Release the funds, because for the past 2 or 3 COPs, there have been pledges. And I think it's time now to release the funds so people can start the work, and then make sure that make sure that desertification is controlled. Use the examples that you have with China, with the Gobi Desert. You know, all that. It's transfer of skills, technology, and mindset as well is very important.
Our focus is, community-based. This rangeland restoration, we have to give priority, and the nomadic life, we have to encourage them. That spirit we should not be lost. Otherwise, the youth, they are not interested. They go to cities. So then what we have to do? We have to encourage youth, give some small alternative employment in the village itself, and they will be very happy.
Exhibition areas hosted by international organizations and various countries, including China, are showcasing achievements in grassland protection, desertification control, and global collaboration. Participants are urging the international community to strengthen cooperation across climate change, funding mechanisms, and youth education. Tang Xin, CGTN, Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia.
And that is it for this edition of The World Today. I'll be back shortly with more news from the continent in Africa Live. Thanks for watching. Dozens of worshippers are kidnapped from a mosque in Nigeria's Niger state. The Ebola epidemic in the DRC continues to intensify despite a range of measures to stop its spread. And as the world marks Day of Remembrance of the slave trade, we'll examine the complicated legacy it has left in some parts of Africa. I'm Beatrice Marshall in Nairobi. Welcome to Africa Live. Also ahead on the program, Tanzania doubles its electricity generation capacity as it opens a new hydropower plant on the Rufiji River. And coming up in sports, the Springboks suffer a shock defeat against their greatest rival in Johannesburg. We begin in Nigeria, where authorities continue to struggle with insecurity and violence. In the latest incident, police in Niger state say armed men abducted several people from a mosque during Friday prayers. The attack on Kipenya Mosque in the Bogu local government area occurred in the early afternoon following raids on two nearby villages. Police reported no casualties and have deployed a security team for rescue operations, although specific details about the number of kidnappers are unconfirmed. Local sources estimate that over 60 people were taken, indicating a coordinated effort across 4 communities in the region. Mass kidnappings for ransom have become common in the area as criminal gangs known as bandits continue to raid villages, schools and highways. In neighboring Niger, the 15 police officers that were killed on a Friday attack in the southwest have been laid to rest. Unidentified armed men on motorbikes reportedly stormed a police barracks near the town of Tessa in the Dosso region, close to the borders with Nigeria and Benin. Witnesses say the attackers may have come from Nigeria. Videos shared on social media appear to show burnt-out vehicles and shelters inside the compound. Nigerian authorities have not yet publicly commented on the attack. The area has faced growing militant violence, with groups linked to Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State active in Niger's border regions. Let's turn to the Democratic Republic of Congo, which continues battling its worst Ebola outbreak to date. Confirmed cases has risen to over 5,300 in 6 affected provinces, and officials warn it is still spreading. The response has continued to face hurdles, including attacks on health workers and long-running insecurity from rebel activity. Another challenge has been high population mobility, driven by displacement and the booming mining economy. CGTN's David Bethe reports.
At the Igabarie mining site in Ituri province, the search for gold is a long and exacting activity. Men, women, and in some cases children work for as little as a few dollars a day. Many of them are internally displaced people from a nearby makeshift camp and have been fleeing conflict for decades. Others come from the surrounding towns and villages, including several affected by the ongoing Ebola epidemic.
I have lost 13 people in my family, but we can't find anywhere to get medical treatment or vaccinations.
Esperance Acheni Nyango is from a village called Ladile. She said people are dying there in large numbers. She fears Ebola too, but needs mining work to survive and feed her children.
I come here to work because I have many household needs to meet. If I can earn even $4.36 so the children can eat, it helps. I'm struggling to pay rent. This is why I come here to work.
Daniel Musingo is another miner from the town of Gasupka. He says he's been here for a month and does his best to maintain social distancing and respects the no handshake policy. He also claims that the disease is rampant in the villages around the mine and lives in constant worry in case of infection.
I want NGOs and the government to bring an Ebola treatment center to Igabaril so people can be quarantined. Patients die on the road while being evacuated to Bunia. If the ETC was nearby, people could receive care quickly and recover.
The three are among an estimated 2 million people who work in artisanal and small-scale mining across the country. The activity draws a high mobile workforce as miners travel across the region in search of gold and between mining areas and population centers to trade the mineral. Officials say the constant movement is also making Ebola harder to contain, complicating efforts to find infected people and trace those who may have been exposed.
Of course we are afraid of this disease, but we are displaced by war and life is difficult. This is why we have to work under these conditions.
A tough choice between disease vigilance and economic survival. David Mbidi, CGTN.
The Democratic Republic of the Congo and an M23-led rebel alliance have agreed on a roadmap for peace talks, even as fighting continues in the country's east. And that's according to a joint statement which added that the parties had developed, quote, a roadmap setting out a sequenced steps and timelines for negotiations, end quote, under a framework agreement signed in the Qatari capital, Doha, in November. The M23 seized large swathes of the country's east early last year, intensifying its conflict with the government and forcing millions of people to flee their homes. What exactly is the Doha Framework Agreement? CGTN's Daniel Arap-Moy explains.
The comprehensive Doha Framework Agreement formally came into force in November 2025. Subsequent high-level meetings, including recent talks in Geneva, have focused on translating the framework into concrete and forcible action. The two primary conflict parties are the government of the Democratic Republic of the Congo and the M23 rebel movement. The peace track is mediated by the state of Qatar, with crucial international backing from the United States, the African Union, and the West African nation of Togo. For years, violent fighting in eastern Congo has forced millions of innocent families from their homes, and this plan aims to permanently stop that violence. The Doha framework focuses on three major goals: enforcing a strict ceasefire monitored by independent observers; secondly, opening safe routes so emergency food and medical aid can reach trapped civilians; and restoring basic services like water, shelter, and schools so families can safely return home. The talks recently moved to Geneva to revive stalled steps. Both sides agreed on a clear timeline and set up a team to quickly report and fix any broken rules. While turning this agreement into lasting peace will take time, these renewed talks give millions of people in the DRC real hope for a safer future. Daniel Arap-Moy, CGTN.
A Congolese artist who grew up in the east of the DRC is using his paintings to denounce decades of conflict in his region. Moyengo Kadima says he uses his artworks to advocate for unity and justice for millions of victims who've suffered years of violence. CGTN's Chris Ochamringa attended Kadima's exhibition in the DRC capital, Kinshasa, and now reports.
They say a picture is worth 1,000 words. Most of these pictures here tell a sad story of the conflicts and suffering endured by Congolese people in Eastern DRC for more than 3 decades. Moyengo Kadima is the man behind the paintings. He grew up in Goma, a city now controlled by M23 rebels, and witnessed the horrors of war. He now uses his art to denounce the violence and call for peace.
Nous avons un rôle important à jouer.
We have an important role to play in raising awareness among our population through our art. Our art is not just for entertainment. It's also a tool for informing people about the aggression we face. People outside our country don't see us as separate tribes. They see us as one nation. If we as a people remain divided, our enemies will exploit those divisions to destroy us.
His exhibition was attended by people of all ages in Kinshasa.
For me, this event is really encouraging. You don't need words to understand what's happening. The pictures speak for themselves. When you look at them, you see images of children who have been burnt, families that have been affected, and lives that have been shattered.
Kadima's art exhibition was held at the Genocost Memorial Grounds in Kinshasa. The term Genocost refers to a genocide carried out for economic gain. Every August 2nd, the DRC government commemorates the victims of the massacres in the country's east. Other artists from Eastern DRC hailed Kadima's exhibition for highlighting the suffering caused by the war.
Personally, having lived in Goma, I consider what is happening there an expression of resilience rather than an act of victimization. People there don't dwell on massacres. They rebuild day and night to show that despite everything happening around them, they're still standing and will overcome.
The DRC has vast mineral deposits, but decades of conflict have fueled widespread smuggling, leaving millions of Congolese people living in poverty. For Kadima, his artworks are an effort to give a voice to that injustice.
Portraits like this one of precious minerals in blood-stained hands capture the exploitation, conflicts, and the illegal mining that have plagued the DRC for decades. The government recently introduced reforms aimed at streamlining the sector, but ongoing conflicts in Eastern DRC may make those reforms difficult to implement. Chris Ochamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
Today marks the International Day for the Remembrance of the Slave Trade and its abolition. Over the centuries, millions of people from Africa were forcibly displaced through trans-Saharan, Indian Ocean and transatlantic slave trades to support economies and empires in the Middle East, Europe and the Americas. It was a brutal system of discrimination and exploitation that condemned many and their descendants to lives of servitude. Yet, in many places across Africa, such as the large island nation of Madagascar, its legacy remains a sensitive and rarely discussed topic. CGTN's Joy Kirukijuma has more.
For centuries, Madagascar was part of slave trading networks across the Indian Ocean long before European powers arrived on the island.
The first buyers were those coming from the Arabian Peninsula and Persian Gulf. At that time, Madagascar was already supplying captives to the slave trade in the southwestern Indian Ocean.
European expansion later widened these networks, connecting Madagascar to markets across the Indian Ocean and the Americas. But historians say the trade was not simply imposed from outside. Malagasy kingdoms and communities were also involved in capturing and supplying people.
To supply the trade, people had to raid villages, kidnap people, free men and take them to the coast to be sold, either to Arabs or Europeans. And these operations were carried out by Malagasy people.
The historian says all Malagasy kingdoms participated to varying degrees and that the slave trade did not refer to exactly the same thing.
In Malagasy society, it was not a question of color but of social status. If you lost your social status, you could be reduced to slavery.
According to Claudio, colonial rule later introduced a new interpretation of these social categories.
It was during the colonial period that another form of social categorization emerged. There were a conflation between slaves and the Métis or black. The Métis were not slaves, they were free people. When colonization came with European ideas, a group of people who considered themselves white conflated the Métis or black and slaves into a single category.
Today, the historian says this complex history remains largely absent from the school curriculum, making remembrance an important part of confronting Madagascar's past. Joy Kirukijuma, CGTN.
West Africa was a major source of slaves for Europe and the Americas. Historians estimate that over 3 million black slaves were forcibly transported from the Nigerian coastal settlement of Badagry. Across the town are historical relics and museums in memory of that dark past. But as CGTN's David Mbithi tells us, local authorities are trying to reshape the narrative into one of hope and rebirth.
Located in the westernmost part of Nigeria's Lagos state, Badagry shares a border with the Republic of Benin and faces the Atlantic Ocean. By the 15th century, the arrival of Western colonizers turned this vital trading port into a major hub for the West African slave trade. Inside one local museum, guides display the chains and instruments of torture used to control and punish enslaved people, including tiny shackles meant for children and branding irons that were used to burn a slave owner's name onto human skin.
It's very sad to see how all these slaves were treated and seeing all the instruments, the ones they used to tie to their neck, the ones they used to perforate their mouth. It's just very emotional to see, knowing that some of my ancestors might have had to pass through this.
They also use it to perforate because communication is not allowed. They put this inside the fire, they draw the upper lip and they put a hole They put another hose here. Now, after the piercing of the upper and lower lips, they have to draw the two lips through this, called mouth clip or mouth guard this way.
At the site of a former slave market, historical records show that a single fine umbrella could be traded for 40 slaves, while a bottle of liquor could buy up to 10 indentured souls. The slave trade in Badagry spanned over 400 years, beginning in 1473 and continuing through illegal underground markets until 1888, long after being officially abolished. This 4th century plunder devastated local agriculture and economic systems, laying the deep-rooted historical groundwork for many of Africa's modern challenges.
Europe was rebuilt after the Second World War. I think Africa deserved to be rebuilt after the transatlantic slave trade, because millions, several millions of Africans died. European countries, all those participated countries should come, apologize to Africa, and see how African can be compensated after the transatlantic slave trade.
On the path leading to the departure shores stands a unique relic known as the Spirit Attenuation Well. Legend has it that local wizards spike the well water with herbs and spells, and any slave who drank from it will lose their will to resist and forget their past. The shadow of this dark history remains so strong. To this day, local residents refuse to drink from the well. After passing this well, captives were marched to the notorious point of no return, boarding ships destined for foreign lands. Today, local authorities are planning to build a point of return alongside the original monument. Visitors walking the ancient slave route will be able to step through this new gate back onto African soil, a transformation meant to break the historical curse of no return and symbolize rebirth and hope. Devin Bidi, CGTN.
In Cape Town, an exhibition is underway at the Iziko South African National Gallery, focusing on the history of slavery. CGTN's Wanja Mungai tells us it also asks how societies today can confront historical trauma, seek healing and rethink the meaning of freedom.
Cape Town's strategic location at the southernmost part of Africa between the Atlantic and Indian Oceans made it a convenient colonial settlement and slave trade center. The Dutch, who had set up camp there around the 17th century, would bring in slaves from Mozambique, Madagascar, India, Sri Lanka and Southeast Asia. They forced them to work in agriculture, construction, at the port and in domestic service. During that period of oppression, people were subjected to torture and violence. A new exhibition in Cape Town portrays this dark time.
This case and in this section of the exhibition, it's all about the history of slavery and enslavement globally. And this is a if you look at if you film this, you check this image in the case, that is how this device of restraint, extreme restraint and cruelty was used on a human being. So on a chattel slave, it was basically attached, like pulled over their face, so that they couldn't talk, they couldn't make sound, no sound would come out of their mouths. And it was a form and cruel form of restraint.
The exhibition is making use of historical objects, photographs, films, oral histories and contemporary works to explore how enslaved people resisted oppression, fought for freedom and preserved their dignity. The display also goes beyond looking back at the past. It also examines the lasting impact of slavery and asks how societies today can confront historical trauma, seek healing, and rethink the meaning of freedom. The exhibition also indicates a close relationship between the treatment of slaves then and the apartheid regime that governed South Africa up to the early 90s.
What we're trying to say is the legacy of colonialism, like the legacy of the control, the restraint that the slaves suffered during that time, was carried over to apartheid South Africa. There's definitely a direct line between it. Control of movement, restraint, severe punishment, violence was carried over from colonial times to apartheid. So if you just look at the document, like the letter during slavery, the Licenti brief, and you look at the passbook that controlled black men and women and when and how they moved, authorized them, you've got the same form of restraint and control over them.
and their movements.
As the visitors walk into the Iziko Gallery, they get a chance to reflect on the long struggle for freedom and equality and on the complex historical connections forged between different regions and cultures around the world. Wanja Mungai, CGTN.
Across Africa, access to healthcare continues to be a major bottleneck. Traffic congestion, long distances and crowded hospitals are among the biggest challenges. Yet modern technology is now changing the narrative. In Côte d'Ivoire's capital, Abidjan, the coupling of telemedicine and home visits is giving more people an opportunity to get reliable healthcare. CGTN's Sharon Baranga has more.
In Côte d'Ivoire, seeing a doctor no longer means spending hours in a waiting room. Since 2019, the Humanoid e-health center has been using telemedicine to connect doctors with patients across the capital, Abidjan. Dr. Esther Kasi Aleba begins her consultation from behind a computer. Her patient is several kilometers away, unable to make the journey because of the city's notorious traffic. Through a video consultation, the doctor listens to the patient, asks questions, and assesses her symptoms remotely. There are no crowded waiting rooms or long journeys, just an internet connection connecting the patient to medical care.
We realized that for simple tests, such as a malaria test or minor symptoms, patients can face very long waiting times in hospitals. We decided to take some of the pressure off hospitals by managing these minor conditions while using technology to improve access to healthcare.
But the consultation does not necessarily end online. When a physical examination or treatment is needed, the center can send a medical team directly to the patient's home.
We recover more quickly at home, with our family and with a little family love. This enables us to recover better, or let's say, to recover more quickly.
Nurse Micheline Apete is preparing to make one of those visits.
We are going to Autobahn to see a patient suffering from abdominal pain. She has a fever, headaches and vomiting. Following the doctor's instructions, we are going to treat her.
The team sets off for Autobahn. Minutes later, they arrive at the patient's home and begin treatment following the doctor's instructions.
We gave her intravenous paracetamol to bring down her fever. The doctor prescribed a treatment plan, including a vitamin complex, to give her a boost. She'll feel better in about 10 minutes.
For Seinabu Meso, telemedicine has been part of her healthcare routine for 7 years. After years of dealing with traffic and hospital queues, she says receiving care at home has made a significant difference.
I am not too keen on hospital's bed, so I prefer to be hospitalized at home, in my bedroom or living room. What's changed for me is that there is always a team on hand, whatever the time, and I do not need to travel to access care. Even for blood tests and test results, I have access to medical services provided in clinics, but at home without having to travel.
The Humanoid e-health center says it receives around 5 requests for remote consultations each day. Consultations and home visits are included in its treatment packages, making the service an alternative for patients seeking convenient access to care. But telemedicine has its limits. The center mainly handles minor conditions remotely. When patients require surgery, resuscitation, or other specialized treatment, they are referred to specialist facilities. For now, the combination of technology and home-based care is offering some Abidjan residents a simpler way to reach a doctor without having to leave home. Sharon Baranga, CGTN.
Tanzania has doubled its electricity generation capacity through the opening of a massive new hydropower plant on the Rufiji River. At a cost of almost $3 billion, the Julius Nyerere hydropower project raises installed capacity to 4,646 megawatts, creating a surplus of more than 2,300 megawatts. The project has faced criticism over potential environmental impacts on ecosystems linked to the Celius Games Reserve. However, the government says it's crucial for energy security and economic development. Officials say the excess power could be exported to neighboring countries, including Kenya and Zambia, while supporting industrial growth at home.
This project currently contributes about half of the electricity being used in the country. This increase has helped eliminate the challenge of frequent power outages, which used to cause disruptions to domestic production, service delivery including in hospitals, and even household use. Therefore, the electricity generated by this plant has increased our power generation capacity and enabled us to maintain sufficient electricity reserves. We're confident that this project will create more opportunities for business, investment, production, job creation, and will increase individual incomes as well as the nation's overall economic output.
In Senegal, where the Chinese embassy has organized a roundtable discussion on China's zero-tariff policy for Africa. Held on Friday, the event brought together representatives of the Senegalese government and prominent local and Chinese entrepreneurs. In May of this year, China eliminated import duties for 53 African countries having diplomatic ties with Beijing. Those in attendance hailed the plan, saying it was providing new opportunities for Sino-Senegalese trade by enhancing the competitiveness of Senegalese products in the Chinese market. China's ambassador to Senegal said the policy demonstrated China's consistent political commitment to South-South cooperation. The event also marked the official launch of Trade Senegal, the country's international trade data services platform.
The zero-tariff policy is not only an institutional concession, but also a significant opportunity to promote the upgrading of export structure. It marks a new stage in China-Africa economic and trade cooperation, empowered by institutional openness. This will significantly enhance Africa's ability to transform itself through production, trade, and industrial development.
This roundtable remains a good starting point, not only for further promoting exports to China, but also for building a support framework to address the weakness of local industrial capacity, the lack of processing of our products, logistical cost and constraints, as well as strict requirements regarding sanitary, not tariff standards.
The Second World Humanoid Robot Games have opened in Beijing. Hundreds of teams from 16 countries have brought their robots to compete in the Chinese capital over the coming days. From the football pitch to the factory floor, the games are expected to showcase the latest developments and innovations in the area. Our reporters Yang Chengxi and Chen Chiachi have more.
This is what it looks like when a whole industry is booming in China.
We are here in Beijing at the opening ceremony of the Second World Humanoid Robot Games. More than 2,000 robots are competing across 51 events.
It may sound bizarre. Robots fighting, robots playing football, robots playing tennis. But this isn't just a giant spectacle, because every event is testing something that could eventually matter in the real world.
These humanoid robots are using 5-fingered robot hands to control musical instruments, testing delicate, flexible manipulation. On the football pitch, robots have to sense the environment, control their bodies, and coordinate with teammates. This year, Brazil brings a national soccer team.
I think we will have a great result also as the same as the soccer players. The robots will do a great result as well.
On the tennis court, robots track an incredibly fast-moving ball and make split-second AI-driven decisions. A fighting robot, it tests power, balance, and motion control. A new generation of young Chinese AI talent is chasing big dreams.
We may be young, but our technology is solid. Personally, I want to explore vertical AI applications. I hope to integrate AI with more hardware to generate greater practical and commercial value.
We are a startup-oriented team developing marine robots.
These games bring together upstream and downstream players across the robotics supply chain.
Many component sectors, including sensors, cables, and even housings, are getting better guidance from these games.
The 5-day showdown is only getting started, bringing together the brightest minds from around the world to push humanoid robotics one step closer to the future.
During the opening sessions, robots have already broken the human world records in the 100-meter run and standing vertical jump. But again, it's not just about the competition. It's about pushing the tech frontier and bringing smart machines closer to people's homes. Yang Chengxi and Chen Jiaqi, CGTN, Beijing.
And coming up in your sports news, the Springboks suffer a shock defeat against their greatest rival in Johannesburg. And we begin with rugby union, and New Zealand responded to their critics by putting on a masterclass to beat the world champions.